The alien council had gathered again. The chamber was vast, a hollow monument to the ancient and powerful species that had built it. Around the long, obsidian table sat the representatives of 4 major galactic civilizations, each one more technologically advanced than the last. At the head, an emissary from the Verkle, a race of silicon-based, hyper-intelligent beings, spoke first. Their translucent bodies shimmered in the light, their minds processing information faster than any human could comprehend. "The humans are a blight," the emissary began, their voice a soundless hum that reverberated within the minds of the others. "They are a threat to the balance of the galaxy. Their environment is hostile, and their species, chaotic at best. They live on a death world, a planet where everything is trying to kill them. They are primitive, unrefined, and yet, they persist. But no matter how much they evolve, they will never rise above their nature." A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. The Ixari, a reptilian species with armored skin and sharp claws, nodded in unison, their eyes reflecting a mix of disdain and curiosity. "Why waste resources on them?" one of the Ixari spoke, his voice deep and gravelly. "Their civilization is fractured. They lack true unity. They fight each other more than they fight any external threat. Let them be. They have nothing to offer." "True," said the Merkith representative, a being of liquid metal with no fixed form. Its voice oozed like liquid mercury. "They are the least evolved of any species we've encountered. Their technology is rudimentary, and their understanding of the universe is laughable. There is no need to interfere. The galaxy will be better off without their meddling." The representatives around the table agreed once more, their voices a chorus of indifference. The consensus was clear: humanity was weak. Irrelevant. A nuisance. But they were not yet a direct threat to galactic peace, so they were to be left alone, at least for now. Captain Nadia Marston sat quietly in a dark, secure room aboard the Seraph, a human military vessel that orbited a desolate moon far from Earth. Her eyes were fixed on the stars outside the viewport. She was preparing for a mission, but her thoughts lingered on the recent transmission she had received from an old contact within the Galactic Alliance. The transmission was brief, cryptic even, but the message was clear: the aliens were discussing humanity, and not in a way that boded well. It was a familiar sentiment. She had heard it all her life, the galaxy's disdain for Earth and its people. But this time, something felt different. Something was coming, and humanity's place in the universe would soon be tested. Nadia had grown up hearing about humanity's inferiority. As a child, she'd been taught that humans were lucky to have made it this far, fortunate survivors of an unforgiving planet. The notion that Earth's people were somehow special, that their resilience could give them an edge in the galaxy, was laughable to the beings who held the power. As she paced the room, Nadia's mind wandered back to her first encounter with the Verkle. It had been a diplomatic mission. Earth was still new to interstellar diplomacy, and her crew had been the first to meet with the Verkle, hoping to establish a peaceful exchange of resources. The encounter had gone horribly wrong. The Verkle had been polite, but their condescension was palpable. They'd marveled at humanity's survival instincts, but their words carried a thinly veiled mockery. The humans had not yet reached the stars, they had said, and it was unlikely they ever would. "What does a species so fragile have to offer?" one Verkle had asked, watching the humans with an expression that suggested they were looking at an experiment. "You barely control your own planet." In the years that followed, Nadia had seen the same disdain from every other species they encountered. The Ixari had called humans a curiosity, a race that could never truly understand the galactic network. The Merkith had written them off as primitive, incapable of grasping the intricacies of galactic politics. But none of that bothered Nadia. What irritated her was the complete lack of understanding. They saw humanity's struggles as weaknesses, as proof of inferiority. They failed to comprehend what it meant to be a human, a species that had survived extinction-level events, that had learned to thrive despite their environment's relentless cruelty. Earth was no paradise, but humanity had learned to adapt. Nadia had spent years fighting on Earth's front lines, facing battles that could break even the most powerful warriors of the galaxy. The storms on Earth were not just weather patterns, they were living, breathing dangers that could kill without warning. The creatures that inhabited the planet were apex predators, and humans had learned to fight them or die. But the Council had no idea about the human spirit. They did not understand the power of sheer will, the fire that burned inside humanity. It wasn't about the technology, it wasn't about the weapons, they had all of that. It was the drive to survive against the odds, to face death with defiance. On the Seraph, Nadia received her orders. A fleet of ships, part of a coalition led by the Verkal, had entered the system. They were approaching Earth, though no one knew why. There was no official declaration of war, no reason for the sudden movement. But the tension was palpable. Her mission was to intercept them, to find out what they were planning before it was too late. Nadia gathered her team, a group of elite soldiers trained for the harshest environments on Earth. These were not soldiers who fought in pristine, controlled environments. They had trained in the jungles, the mountains, the deserts, the icy wastelands. They had fought against everything Earth could throw at them, and they were ready for whatever was to come. As the mission briefing ended, Nadia stood before her team. The room was silent as they prepared for what could be their last mission. They had faced the impossible before, but this time felt different. This time, the galaxy itself had cast its judgment on them. "I know what they think of us," Nadia began, her voice steady. "They think we're weak. They think we're not worthy of the stars. But they don't know us. They don't understand who we are. And it's time we show them." Her words were met with a unified nod from her team. They didn't need to speak, their expressions said it all. They were ready. The Seraph moved toward the fleet. As they neared, Nadia's eyes locked on the approaching ships. Each one was enormous, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. The Verkal ships gleamed with technology that hummed with an otherworldly energy. It was hard to fathom that these beings, who had once mocked humanity's survival, were now in position to destroy everything they had fought for. As the first blast of energy crackled through space, striking the Seraph's shields, Nadia felt a strange calm wash over her. This was it. The moment humanity would either rise or fall. And they would not fall. Not today. Not as long as there was a single human left to fight. The mockery continued for hours. The Council was relentless in its assessment of humanity, each alien race presenting their own evidence of human inferiority. The Verkal continued their tirade, their perception of humans as little more than primitive, aggressive creatures unable to adapt to the broader galactic stage. The Azek, a race of massive, insectoid beings, hissed in agreement. Their mandibles clacked together in a cacophony of sound, their hierarchy predicated on sheer brute strength and ruthless survival. "Humans are a weak species," one of the Azek leaders stated in their gravelly voice. "Their planet is volatile, teeming with dangerous wildlife, natural disasters, and toxic environments. How can they claim to be a Deathworld species when their own world is more hostile to them than to others?" The Zyrex, a race of fluid, amorphous beings, pulsed gently in irritation. "The human species is fractured. Factions wage war on each other constantly. They have no unity, no common purpose beyond self-destruction. The greatest danger they pose is to themselves." The Council nodded, each alien leader offering its own critique. But none were more vocal than the Verkal. Their glowing, translucent forms pulsed with cold contempt as they continued to highlight the failures of humanity, comparing them unfavorably to the other more established species of the galaxy. The notion that humans had ever risen above their own volatile, death-filled planet was absurd to them. But even as the debate raged on, there was one quiet figure sitting off to the side, Captain Nadia Marsden. She had listened in silence for most of the meeting, her mind racing with every word spoken. Humanity, in the eyes of the galactic elite, was nothing more than an amusing, transient species, a few chaotic, unpredictable creatures struggling against the odds. The thought stung, but she didn't show it. She had been brought here as a representative of Earth's military forces, one of the most successful and formidable human leaders in recent history. Yet she knew better than to interrupt the flood of condescension that poured from the Council members. At least, she had known better until now. Suddenly, her hand shot up, and the room fell silent. The council members turned to her, eyes narrowing in disdain. Nadia stood, her posture resolute despite the odds stacked against her. The eyes of the galaxy's greatest minds were now upon her. She had never felt more alone, and yet, she had never felt more certain. "I think it's time to correct some misconceptions," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. For a moment, the room remained still, the silence so heavy it felt as though time itself had frozen. The alien council members exchanged glances, some of them snickering quietly to one another. "Ah, the human speaks," the Verkal emissary said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What could you possibly have to say that hasn't already been said, Captain Marsden?" Nadia didn't flinch. "You're right," she said, meeting the Verkal's gaze. "You're all right. Humans are a threat. But you've got it all wrong. You think we're weak, that we're easily prey to the greater powers of the galaxy. You think our planet is chaotic because we can't handle it. But that's where you make your first mistake." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. "The very things that you call weaknesses are what make us stronger. The volatility of our world, our death world, is not a flaw. It's a crucible. Our survival here has forged us into something more than you can even begin to understand. You call us fractured, but every war, every conflict, has made us tougher, more resilient. Every disaster has taught us how to adapt, to overcome, to push past the limits that should have destroyed us." Nadia stepped forward, her eyes unwavering as she scanned the council. The Zyrex shifted uncomfortably in their gelatinous form, the Verkal's glowing body flickering in irritation. They weren't used to being challenged. In fact, no one had ever dared speak like this in front of them. "You think we're a dying breed because we fight among ourselves?" Nadia continued, her voice growing stronger. "We fight because we can fight. We survive because we don't give up when things get tough. Look at us now, here, in this very room. Earth was a battlefield when we first emerged. Wars between nations, religious strife, the struggle for resources, it nearly wiped us out. But we adapted. We learned. We changed. We united." A low murmur spread across the room, but Nadia pushed forward, undeterred. "You've all been so eager to dismiss us. You think we're just another species with no future beyond the borders of our own planet. But you forget that humanity has already made a mark on this galaxy. You forget that humans have already survived the greatest tests. We've been to the stars, yes. But it's not the stars that will destroy us. It's you, all of you." The room went quiet again, the weight of her words settling in. The aliens had dismissed her species as a novelty, but Nadia was done being patient. She was done playing their game. "You think we're nothing but a handful of primitives too weak to face real power, but I'm telling you this, the true test has not even begun." Her voice was unwavering now. "You think we're nothing more than the chaos of our homeworld. But we are more than that. We've survived what no other species would ever dream of surviving. And when the time comes, when we are forced to defend ourselves, not just on Earth, but in the far reaches of the galaxy, you will see what humanity is capable of. You will hear the roar of the Deathworlders." The silence in the room was deafening. The alien leaders stared at her in disbelief. It wasn't what she had said that shook them, it was the certainty in her eyes, the unshakable belief that humanity was more than capable of surviving the galaxy's harshest trials. For the first time, the council had no words. The Verkal emissary's form flickered uncertainly, as if debating whether to respond. But before he could, the doors of the council chamber slammed open with a thunderous crash. A new presence entered, one not from the council, but from outside. Nadia could feel it before the others did, something heavy, something primal. And then, they heard it. A low, guttural growl that shook the walls of the chamber, a sound so ferocious, so raw, that it rattled the very foundation of the meeting hall. It wasn't just an animal's growl. It was the sound of a creature that had been shaped by a death world, a creature that had thrived in the face of destruction. A human, clad in armor, stood at the threshold. "Let me show you what that roar really means," the soldier said, his voice full of menace and pride. Nadia turned to him, a smile playing on her lips. The first step of humanity's rise had been taken. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long. And soon, they would learn what it meant to face the Deathworlders. Captain Nadia Marsden stared out the viewport of the vessel, watching the swirling blue and green planet below. Earth was her home, a world now thrust into the larger, hostile galaxy. It had been years since the first interstellar contact, and humanity had yet to prove itself on the galactic stage. But what most didn't know, what the council members did not understand, was that humanity was not just a species of survivalists. Humans had evolved not only to endure the worst environments but to turn them to their advantage. They were hunters, innovators, and survivors. But more than that, they were warriors. The roar of the Deathworlders had not been heard beyond their isolated planet. Yet, Nadia's team, an elite group of soldiers known as the Vanguard, was preparing for a mission that could alter the course of human history. The Intergalactic Council, despite its condescension, had agreed to a formal demonstration of humanity's military capabilities. The Council's request had been one of arrogance, an assumption that humans would fail to impress, but Nadia had known better. She had studied their alien ways, their strengths and weaknesses, and she knew this mission could turn the tide. The mission, a series of simulations. The Alien Council would challenge humanity's tactics and technology in controlled environments to see if Earth's military had any true potential. If humans couldn't keep up with the galactic standards, they'd remain beneath the aliens' notice. And there would be no going back. In the briefing room, Nadia stood before her team. The room was dimly lit, save for the holographic displays outlining the simulation areas. Around her, the Vanguard readied themselves. Their faces were grim but determined. They were not here to show weakness, they were here to prove a point. "Everyone, listen up," Nadia's voice rang out, commanding the attention of every soldier. "We've been underestimated. The aliens think we're primitive. But we're not. We're survivors, and we'll show them exactly what that means." Her eyes scanned the room, locking with each of her team members. The Azek think strength is all that matters. The Verkal think intelligence is the answer. But they don't understand us. Not yet. We'll show them what it means to fight like humans. The team nodded in agreement. Their leader, a woman who had fought in humanity's most dangerous conflicts, spoke with conviction. And they believed in her. They had fought beside her through impossible odds, and together, they had survived. The mission wasn't just a simulation. It was a declaration. Earth might be a young player in the galaxy, but it had something none of the other species could match, the human will to win. And that would be enough. The team's first encounter in the simulation was against the Azek. They'd been told the Azek's strength was unrivaled, their warriors nearly unstoppable in direct combat. Nadia's team, however, had been trained in guerrilla tactics. They were not about brute force, they would exploit the Azek's reliance on raw power. The first shots were fired in the dense forest of a simulated alien world, the scent of alien flora thick in the air. The Azek came at them in a terrifying display of muscle and power, their massive forms charging through the trees. Nadia's team didn't engage head-on. Instead, they used the terrain to their advantage, drawing the Azek into traps, ambushing them from elevated positions. The battle raged for hours, the sounds of combat echoing in the simulated forest. It wasn't long before the Azek began to falter. Their brute strength was impressive, but it was their reliance on it that became their downfall. Nadia's team outmaneuvered them, using their agility and superior tactics to wear them down. When the final Azek warrior fell, Nadia didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. The Azek had underestimated them. They had paid the price for it. The second phase of the simulation was a different beast entirely, a battle against the Verkal. These beings, while not physically imposing, were among the most intelligent species in the galaxy. Their minds moved at such speeds that they could predict a battle's outcome before it even began. To face them in combat was a daunting task, but Nadia was no stranger to overwhelming odds. The simulation was set in a barren wasteland, the air thick with the dust of long-forgotten civilizations. The Verkle didn't engage with force, they used technology, manipulating the environment and their surroundings to create chaos. Nadia's team had to think fast, adapt to an ever-changing battlefield. The Verkle used holograms to confuse and disorient the humans, making it appear as though they were surrounded by enemies. But the humans had something the Verkle didn't: unpredictability. Nadia's team adapted. They used their most basic instincts, the same instincts that had helped them survive on Earth's dangerous, unpredictable surface. They ignored the holograms and focused on their surroundings. With a few simple adjustments to their sensors, they disrupted the Verkle's illusions. It was a battle of wits, but humanity had a unique advantage: their ability to think in ways that no algorithm could predict. The Verkle were forced to retreat, realizing too late that the humans were not to be underestimated. By the time the final phase of the simulation began, the Council was beginning to feel the first stirrings of doubt. They had expected humanity to fold under the pressure, but instead, humans had adapted, outsmarted, and outmaneuvered every challenge. The final test was one that would push Nadia and her team to their absolute limits. The Council had created a simulation based on an ancient war between two alien factions, the Naxxari and the Korhath. The battle had been one of such scale and brutality that even the Verkle had regarded it as a high point in military history. The humans were to fight both sides at once, facing a scenario where no side could be trusted. Betrayal, backstabbing, and double crosses were all part of the game. But the humans had faced betrayal before. They had fought wars in which trust was a rare commodity. Nadia knew how to turn enemies into allies, how to manipulate the situation to her team's benefit. The battle raged across a sprawling, desolate cityscape, the air thick with dust and fire. The Naxxari were formidable, their weapons advanced and their tactics precise. The Korhath were merciless, their motives unclear and dangerous. Nadia's team had to think on their feet, using subterfuge and deception to create rifts between the two factions. It was a fight for survival, a battle of alliances, and in the end, only one thing mattered: the humans were still standing. As the simulation ended, the Alien Council sat in stunned silence. The results were clear. Humanity had won. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they had something the Council had failed to recognize: the will to survive, the instinct to fight, and the heart to win. And for the first time, the galaxy began to understand that the roar of the Deathworlders was not a sound to be ignored. It was a force to be reckoned with. The first wave came without warning. The Verkle ships, sleek and deadly, had barely entered Earth's orbit before Nadia and her team sprang into action. Their mission was clear: no more negotiations, no more diplomacy. Earth's defenders would show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. For years, Earth had been dismissed, belittled by the likes of the Verkle, Azek, and other alien races who saw them as nothing more than prey. Now, it was time to turn the tables. Nadia stood before the War Council of Earth's united military forces. Her heart pounded as she felt the weight of history bearing down on her. The full might of the galaxy had turned its eye on them, and humanity was poised to either collapse under the pressure or rise to the challenge. It was a test, one that would define their place in the cosmos. "Ready the fighters," Nadia ordered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. This isn't just a fight for survival. It's a statement. Show them what we're made of. Her team, a mixture of military specialists, scientists, and tech engineers, had been working tirelessly to prepare. The Deathworlders weren't simply fighting for Earth, they were fighting for every species that had been trampled upon by the arrogant, elitist races of the galaxy. The humans had trained, innovated, and adapted for years, and now the culmination of their efforts was about to unfold. The Verkle, the Azek, and their allies were not prepared for what was coming. They had underestimated the humans. They had mocked Earth's primitive weapons and crude technologies, unaware that those same inferior tools had been honed by the brutal environment of Earth itself. Humanity's homeworld, with its unpredictable storms, devastating natural disasters, and dangerous wildlife, had shaped them into an unparalleled force of nature. As the first wave of alien ships entered Earth's atmosphere, the humans struck. The fighters, piloted by Earth's finest, darted through the clouds with precision. Their weapons systems, designed for maximum destruction in the harshest environments, tore through the alien ships with a ferocity no one had expected. The Verkal's advanced energy shields, once thought impenetrable, flickered and failed under the sustained fire from Earth's laser cannons and missile systems. The aliens, once so sure of their superiority, scrambled to adapt. The Azek, normally formidable in combat, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned by the speed and agility of Earth's fighters. Their hulking forms, designed for strength rather than finesse, were no match for the human tactical brilliance that guided every move. "We're not just fighting back," Nadia said, her voice calm despite the chaos. "We're rewriting the rules of war." The ground forces, deployed under the cover of airstrikes, advanced with ruthless precision. Humans had mastered guerrilla tactics, using their knowledge of the terrain and their ability to adapt to any environment. The alien invaders, relying on their overwhelming technology and numbers, quickly found themselves in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Every time they thought they had the advantage, humanity's warriors struck from an unexpected angle. And then came the twist. The final blow, the one the aliens hadn't seen coming. Humanity's secret weapon was not just their physical prowess or their technology. It was their ability to unite under pressure, to fight not just for survival but for each other. The Deathworlders were not simply a race of warriors, they were a symbol of humanity's relentless drive to protect their world, their families, and their future. As the battle raged on, the alien forces began to break apart. Communications between the Verkal and Azek fractured as their leadership panicked. Their defeat was inevitable. It was no longer a matter of if but when. The humans had learned their lesson, survival was only part of the equation. The true strength of humanity lay in its unyielding will to fight, no matter the odds. Nadia watched as the last of the alien ships burned up in Earth's atmosphere. Their pride had been shattered, their arrogance replaced by fear. The Council, the same beings who had once dismissed humanity as a primitive species, were now left to reckon with the fact that the Deathworlders had risen. And so, the galaxy would never be the same. The Council members who had once laughed at humanity now understood the truth: Earth was not a planet to be trifled with. And humanity, though still young and untested on the grand stage, was a force to be reckoned with. Nadia stood tall, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Earth had won, but the war was far from over. This victory was just the beginning of a new era. The humans had proven themselves, not through might alone, but through their ability to adapt, to innovate, and most of all, to fight with everything they had. The galaxy had been given fair warning. The Deathworlders were no longer the underdogs. And as long as humanity stood united, no alien force could ever silence their roar again.